In this section, we're going to talk a little bit about ambiguity and subjectivity. Together, these are the twin killers of IT projects. More projects, more misunderstandings of what the project should be doing are caused by ambiguous and/or subjective statements than any other single cause. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to recognize ambiguity and subjectivity and what you can do to reduce those before they start to become costly. What we're going to be covering in this section are misunderstandings, why they kill projects, how we can identify them, and how we can avoid them. We're going to talk about some of the sources of ambiguity, how it comes in, what is ambiguity, and how does it express itself. We'll find that ambiguity can be eliminated by clarifying context and content, both of the dimensions of things that we need to understand in order to make sure that we have a proper understanding of what the user story, feature, requirement, test scenario, whatever it is, has, and ultimately ensuring that we have a common understanding within the team from the beginning, from the author of the user story, from the author of the statement to the very end, to the tester that is proving whether or not the application does it, that everybody is on the same page and that we are working in the same way. Ultimately, we're going to be talking about ways of revealing and removing ambiguity and subjectivity as part of this section. If I were to make the statement that a user story has to be clear to all target audiences, we're looking for clarity. The question becomes, what is clarity? Clarity is actually a common understanding and agreement about the meaning of a statement, whether it's a requirement, a user story, test scenario, a feature, or whatever else it is. The problem that we have is people are involved in the process, and different people have different perceptions of what should be or what shouldn't be. If I look at a discussion within the user community, if there are a group of people that are interested in a particular user story, then ultimately I have to make sure that they reach agreement on what they really want and what they really need. For any given user story or feature or requirement, I need to ensure that the user community that is involved is going to accept that statement once it has been delivered. And I need to ensure that, of course, before we run off and spend the money to develop the program. The other thing I have to make sure is that I share a common understanding with all of those users so that I know what they're talking about. I can relate, I can understand exactly what it is that they want, why they want it, and I can understand how we're going to be expressing it to make sure that we get what we want, that they get what they want through me. The other person I have to make sure of, by the way, is me. Ultimately, my thoughts change. I read a requirement or I read a user story, I read a test scenario, whatever. Yes, and I've got common understanding. I know I've been talking to the user community. I know exactly what they want. And next morning I wake up and think about that user story, and I realize there's a nuance in there that I had not yet considered. And my thinking about it, or my understanding of that user story, requirement, feature, whatever, starts to change. It morphs. There's a risk, because all of a sudden, if I start to think differently today than I thought yesterday, I had better go back to that group of users or the business community that gave me that and talk to them about it. Unfortunately, all too often, I think, well, that is just my deeper understanding of it. I don't want to burden them with that. Don't want to waste their time talking about it. And then ultimately, I end up with my understanding of the user story no longer being a common understanding with theirs. So I have to make sure that I am consistent in my interpretation of what the business community wants. And then, if we're going to be developing it in-house, I have to communicate that to the IT professionals, to the developers, and make sure that they have a common understanding that I have with the business community and that they are able to deliver exactly what it is we want. If I'm going to outsource it or I'm going to buy shrinkware or off-the-shelf software, I need to also make sure that the vendor shares that common understanding. And of course, life gets a little slippery as soon as you're going out to vendors or even to your in-house developers, because they speak a different language, they may have a different meaning. So I have to actually make sure that every word, every term, every phrase in the requirement, in the user story, in the test scenario is understood, that we all share a common understanding from the beginning to the end. And ultimately, the whole concept of test-driven development, of writing tests before we write the program, is one of the best tools our industry has come up with for communicating and ensuring that that common understanding is there from the beginning to the end. If the people who write the user story are involved with the developers or with the people who are going to be testing whether or not the user story meets their needs, then you're much more likely to get that common understanding up front. The problem that we have, that we face or we're fighting, is ambiguity and subjectivity. For a long time, I was kind of a little confused as to what exactly is the difference, ambiguity and subjectivity. Well, there is a difference and it's important. Ambiguity means there are words or phrases that can legitimately be interpreted by different people at different times. And primarily, the only way that you're going to eliminate ambiguity is by context. The example here, I saw her duck. What does that really mean? Without context, I have no idea what that means. It could mean she's under something, or it could mean she has an animal, or there are several other things that it could mean. She's being shot at and she's ducking down to make sure that it misses her. So there are many different interpretations that I could give to that. Unless I know the context of that statement, I have no way of knowing what it really means. Subjectivity, on the other side, means that the meaning of the words or the meaning of the statement will be interpreted by different people differently based on their personal perception of life. The only way I can eliminate subjectivity is by giving concrete examples. If I give a concrete example and I say, this is an invoice, this is the sales tax, this is the calculation for the sales tax as seen on the invoice, there's no more subjectivity. But if I just say the sales tax, then I'm leaving it up to IT to do research as to what is the sales tax, how is it levied, what are the variables that are involved in it, and things like that. If I ask for a screen that has a green background, that is a very subjective statement. I have an opinion as to what makes a green background an appropriately green background, but that could be a very different perception than what IT has. Subjectivity, I have to give concrete examples, and in ambiguity, I can resolve it through context or through content.